like to introduce you to my colleague, Shoran Reid Williams. Shoran, say hi to everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today.
This is really weird because I feel like I'm looking at the camera, but apparently I'm not. So I am actually looking at you, Shoran. I'm trying, but you gotta love technology. Shoran is one of our fantastic litigators here at Miller Johnson. And we have asked her to join us for this important presentation this morning on race and diversity in the workplace. The first part of our session today is not really a webinar per se. It is going to be a conversation between Shoran and I, just a conversation, unscripted, should be interesting. And after that conversation, we will follow up with ideas for you in your workplaces, what you can do to start moving the ball forward when it comes to race and diversity. SHRM has been doing a lot of work in this area since the killing of George Floyd, and they have made all of their materials available, whether you are a SHRM member or not. I encourage you to check that out on their website. Some interesting information from SHRM, at least information that I found interesting, 38%, of Black American workers do not feel emotionally safe sharing how they feel about protests against racial justice. 45% of Black American workers say their workplace discourages discussions of racial justice at work. Only 30% of white Americans feel that way, by the way. 38% of all American workers feel uncomfortable engaging in candid conversations about race at work. So that's a great segue into our conversation with Shoran, because that is exactly what we're about to do. We are going to engage in a candid conversation about race and work. For those of you who have not seen it yet, Shoran, I'm not sure what the right word is, Shoran starred in, wrote, I don't know, but she has maybe a wonderful video. And if you are interested about Shoran's background and her family's history, I highly encourage you to take a snapshot of this slide with your phone, so you have that link and you can go watch her video. And this is, in a sense, a follow-up to that video for the Bachelor, Bachelorette fans out there, kind of like an After the Rose type of episode with Shoran. Again, if you haven't seen the video after this fall employment seminar, I highly encourage you to go watch it. Okay, Shoran, as we get started again with our unscripted conversation with each other, I just want to say something for the benefit of all of those who are watching us who don't know us personally. Sometimes coworkers or friends feel a little hesitant about having these conversations because they're afraid that a word might come out a little awkwardly and may be misunderstood by the person they are talking to. So I just want everyone to know that Shoran and I understand that, right? And if you're going to have a candid, honest conversation, you got to be willing just to talk and understand that things can come out a little awkwardly, maybe sometimes, but we understand our motives are good here, and we are giving each other grace, and we hope all of you do the same for us.
I'd also like to add to that that the opinions expressed here are my own, and they may or may not align with African Americans that some of you know in your personal lives or your professional lives. It's not like, the Black people of West Michigan got together, or for that matter, the west side of the Mississippi, and said, you know what, Shoran is our official spokesman today. It's not how that happened. But what we wanted to do was to give you some perspectives from a platform that you might be able to hear it differently. And so when Rebecca says that this is an extension of the video that I did, I felt compelled to do that video, and quite frankly, compelled to do this conversation. And when Rebecca called me and asked me, and she said, I watched your video, I thought it was important, and I want to know if you would consider helping us in this employment seminar. And Rebecca, do you remember what I said to you?
I don't want to misquote you, Shoran, so you better
Well,
tell.
What I said to you is, I don't want to, but I will.
Yes.
And as we start this conversation, one of the things I would ask people to do is to check out or to read Governor Whitmer's Executive Directive 2020-09, and it deals with addressing racism as a public health crisis. And I'm going to tie it back into why I said what I said to Rebecca when she initially asked me to have this conversation. But I'd just like to read just a very brief paragraph out of the 6 pages. And it says, in addition to having an independent influence on the social detriments of racism in and of itself has broad-reaching and direct negative impacts on individual health outcomes. The American Public Health Association, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American College of Emergency Physicians have declared institutional racism an urgent public health issue and vowed to eradicate racism and discrimination in healthcare. Now, the reason I read that is because, Rebecca, you asked me to address in some of the question, or what you have is, what's like to be a person of color in a predominantly white workplace. And I kept thinking about that, which was the first question you asked me when you asked me to do this, and why my initial response was, I don't want to. And a part of it was because I don't want this topic to be reduced to, I sat in on a seminar or I watched a video and I heard this lawyer talk about how it was difficult for her and her family, because it's so much broader than me, it's so much broader than me, but my experiences are common, unfortunately, for many Black professionals.
Thank you for that, Shoran. That's actually exactly where I wanted to start the conversation. I want to hear from you, and I want everyone to hear from you. What has it been like since March for you as a person of color here? First, when COVID hit, right, and had a much more severe impact on the African-American community, and then after the killing of George Floyd.
Anyone who knows me knows that it is not, I'm rarely at a loss for words, but these feelings were particularly difficult to articulate. There's a partner in our corporate section who probably about May, because we're all working from home, reached out to me and he said, I just want to see how you're doing. And he made me stop and try to identify all of the feelings that I was having, because I'm not the one who's protesting. I'm not the one who has it being individually impacted by things that are happening to people who look like me. That this is not necessarily my life experience as my life exists today. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't make it difficult for me to function. So in The Relentlessness of Black Grief, written by Marissa Evans, she captured what I couldn't say and it couldn't articulate well. And in that article, she said, we get no relief from being Black in America. No amount of reading lists on race or ask your Black coworkers how they're doing articles is enough. It doesn't help Black folks often that they feel that what we feel must set aside their cumulative trauma to help white people understand the perils and indignities of racism and inequality. We have no breaks from the allies, the real ones or the alleged ones, the perpetrators, the microaggressions, the systematic issues, or the institutionalized racism. Nevertheless, we have an obligation to those who came before us to meet this moment with purpose and clarity. And that, in a nutshell, is I don't get the privilege of not showing up as the professional that I must in this environment. I don't get the privilege of ignoring what's happening in the world to Black people and the people who look like me just because I have this job. And I am fortunate enough to not be in an environment where I feel underappreciated, where because my hair looks different, I feel like people stop in the hallway and look at me. Because I am one of 2 Black women in the firm, I feel like people don't take my opinion seriously, but that's not the case for a lot of Black professionals. So, it's hard. It is hard. And if I could say anything to so many of the people who are listening today, the Black professionals around you are toting a very heavy bucket, because no matter what's happening outside of our windows in downtown Kalamazoo or downtown Grand Rapids, outside of our offices, we have to show up and be the consummate professionals, no matter how the pain of the person who looks like us that we can see right outside of our windows is affecting us. And that tension is can be debilitating. And I would implore you to recognize that it's there, because I don't necessarily have an answer for you about how to help them. But even recognizing that it exists and trying to give some grace and some room for it is the beginning.
Shoran, do you appreciate it when colleagues ask you how you're doing? Is that something that you'd like people to do more of, less of? For people that may want to, but feel awkward initiating that conversation, do you have any suggestions for how to start the conversation tactfully?
So I actually do appreciate it. But what I appreciate more is if my answer is uncomfortable, that you stand there and listen to my answer. Because it's not the, how was your weekend? It's that it's not the, oh, hey, how are you doing, as you pass me moving on. It's not that flippant. And the reason Ken Hoffman's question to me meant so much was because he cared enough to see how I was doing. Literally just wanted to know how I felt. And so, yes, but you also need to recognize that sometimes people they're not going to want to have the full conversation. Right. But, I do think that there are times when you can have that conversation, but be prepared for an answer that might make you uncomfortable as a white colleague, but knowing that you cared enough to ask and really wanted the answer is important.
We've got a lot of HR folks on the phone and business leaders on the phone that are listening to what you're saying. They've been watching the news. They care deeply about these things, but sometimes don't know where to start. So let's talk about things that employers can do. Before we get into the specifics, I'm going to get to the end of this slide first, the very last bullet, because I do not want to run out of time to say this. You will see my email address and Shoran's email address. We're going to give you some ideas, but we know that we can do more collectively as a community than any of us can do individually. And this really is a community issue. This is not a Miller-Johnson issue. This is not an issue that any one of us can solve by ourselves. We can each help move the ball forward. But again, we can do more as a community together than individually. If you have ideas that have worked in your organization or that you would recommend to other organizations, please email them to Shoran and me. We will collect all of those ideas, compile them, and send them out to all of you who are attending today. So you will get those in a few weeks. We will keep your name and organization confidential, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we're going to get lots more ideas after this webinar, Shoran, but let's just talk about some ideas people can take home with them today. And I know, Shoran, you've been very active in our diversity committee, and you helped come up with a lot of the ideas for Miller-Johnson and our platform going forward. Some of the things we've done is an internal message, right, shortly after George Floyd's killing, to make sure that we were all of the same, that everyone here understood the way that that killing impacted us and how we viewed it. An external message to the community, largely the same. The video series, which I mentioned at the beginning, Shoran kicked it off for us, was very, very impactful for all of our folks here, as well as the community. Shoran, do you want to talk about some other ideas that you have?
I do, and I know we're running down on time, but one of the great places that I think businesses can start to have a sustained impact on addressing these inequities that are identified and collectively referred to as institutional racism is in their hiring practices and in how they dedicate their financial resources by using the vendors of color. And we say we want everybody to feel welcome. Well, if everybody in the room is right-handed and everything in the room is created for right-handed people, it's kind of hard to say, we really want left-handed people to come here, because you don't have the things in place for left-handed people to feel comfortable doing their jobs. So I would say, look at how you can tie hiring more Black and brown people across the spectrum of your organization to create an environment where people walk through the halls and see people who look like them. Representation matters. And the more that you can increase your hiring, the more people then start to feel comfortable showing up as their authentic selves at work, in addition to making a concerted effort to try to use vendors of color in videography. If you're doing foods, if you need whatever the vending service may be, those are some quick ways, not necessarily easy, but ways to increase your diversity and then create the environment and the structures at your place of employment to make sure that people then advance through your system and want to stay.
Shoran, for organizations that are participating today that don't currently have a D&I program in place, right? So they need to probably start with, small, right? What advice do you have for those organizations who are just starting down this path?
That we put our money where it matters. So if you really want to create a diversity and inclusion platform, where are you dedicating the resources to that? Is it through a hire? Is it through a dedicated person already on your staff, but someone who it is their job to increase diversity and inclusion in your environment and is being held accountable for their results? And then whether you hire a new person or whether you then create a job or rededicate some resources that you already have. That to me is the most important thing that you can do as a business. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shoran. That was so helpful for me personally, and I know for the folks attending today.